Everyone at the Center for Community Media would like to extend our sincerest condolences to the family and friends of Michael Wilder, who has recently passed. Michael was a friend and actively involved himself with the Center for Community Media. Donations can be made to the GoFundMe page linked in the description of this video. Michael will be missed. Hi, and welcome to The Beat, a news and talk program brought to you by the Center for Community Media at Worcester State University. I'm your host, Jordan Johnson, and joining us in the studio today is Colors of Jazz host Bonnie Johnson from WICN Public Radio. And Bonnie, thank you for coming on the show today.
I'm pleased to be here today. Thanks, Jordan.
No problem. So the first question I want to ask you is, how did you first discover your passion for jazz music?
I have to say my passion for jazz has kind of been evolving. And my discovery of the music came from WICN, where I host. I found WICN on the radio dial, or 90.5 WICN on the radio dial when I returned home from college. And I had an affinity or an ear for ballads and slow music. I really enjoyed that kind of set. And listening to ICN, the music sounded similar to like these slow jams, the pace. And I thought, whoa, what's this? And so I kept my dial there and really became an avid listener of the jazz. And to be honest, I didn't really have the language or the vocabulary to know that some of the music I had heard in my youth as a child coming up, as a teenager, I didn't know it was jazz. So that being said, my passion over time has developed as a listener of the music, and the more I do and see live jazz, the more enamored I become with it, or the artists who make it.
For sure. And it's interesting that you mentioned that you said that you fell in love with the music, not knowing that it was jazz, just knowing the way it sounded. That's something I think that we can take away from jazz music as a whole, just the aesthetic and how beautiful it is at the end of the day. But you mentioned your education, so I want to touch on that. Where did you go for your education, and did you know early on that's what you wanted to do at WICN?
Oh, like host?
Yes.
Well, so I went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and that experience was kind of interesting. You know, coming up as a teenager, one of my hobbies was collecting music. And the music I collected was hip hop, what you might describe as hip hop, or rap of the time. So, and actually I came up as a teenager in the heyday of what's known as rap music. I'm aging myself, but that is what it is. So it had very much an influence on where I am today. I have a sister, and she and I would collectively buy music. We still have crates. I say we, because I own part of that. We just had a couple of crates of records, and we bought DJ equipment, turntables, and I became a turntablist and learned how to mix the music. So I would describe myself as a mix master. As a teenager, that was my hobby, playing music, and I would grab recordings off the radio, and if we had a party, I would supply the music. I would sign up for contests, like DJ contests, to the extent that I could be in clubs or whatever. Every now and then I'd get into a contest, and one time I came in second, and we were dismayed, but I made money from being in this contest. I will say that it wasn't something I thought of as a career. It was just who I was. It was kind of an extension of me. So when I went to college, I was more focused on what were my strengths academically, and that was math and science. So I went into an engineering program at Howard, and I was an engineering student, but my favorite thing to do at Howard was listen to the radio. They had a college station, and that's where I discovered what's known as the Quiet Storm. And this is sort of this has kind of carried on throughout radio stations around the country, but I think it may have originated at WHUR. And I was an avid listener there, and I would record that music, make little mixtapes. And yeah, I literally did not think to go to communication school or to go, like you all are here in your media program. We had that at Howard, but it wasn't where my focus was. I was really focused on what I could do academically. And by the way, no one ever really told me, like my counselors or advisors never said. And I guess I didn't have the smartphone and the quick access to information that is so prevalent today, so that I really didn't know.
It's good to see that you ended up doing something that you love.
Yeah.
You're able to make a career out of it. But you did mention hip hop music.
Yes.
But can you give us any examples of any hip hop artists you used to listen to coming back up in the heyday?
Okay. Oh, sure. Well, so I guess I would say like throwback to, so rap music evolved, and with over time more artists came on the scene. So if I think way back, it's The Message, right? So many people are aware of that song.
You mentioned some of the guests you had on your show. How do you go about reaching these individuals to have them come in?
One of the first people I interviewed was an R&B singer named Brian McKnight.
Brian McKnight?
He was my very first interview.
Wow.
And the way I ended up...
It's a pretty impressive first guest. Sorry to cut you off, but very impressive.
Yeah, right? Isn't it impressive? It is.
Yeah.
He was coming into Providence, and I knew he was going to be performing there. And so I reached to the venue and just let them know I have a program where I play Brian's music, and I would love to let my listeners know, or our listeners know, that he's coming. And their response was, let's confirm time to talk. So they actually invited me to interview him, and I did. I had no idea what I was doing. I am not making this up, you know. I just asked, and then I just made the call, made up the questions, and did what I had to do. And then thus began my quote-unquote career as an kind of in the interviewing space, right? So, because like reaching him and getting a response was kind of cool, right? So then that created no barrier for me. So when I heard Al Jarreau had a new album, I wrote and asked if I could talk to Al Jarreau, and they invited me to talk to Al Jarreau. Today, a lot of my interviews come from my relationship with publicists who are out there promoting jazz, specifically promoting the artists who are recording new music today, like as we speak. I have probably half a dozen messages, which are press releases about the music, and I have a choice to respond or not. I can only go so far. I can only listen to so much, but oftentimes I'm invited to review and or preview or critique music. Because at this point, you know, my role as a producer and a host of Colors of Jazz has evolved into my membership in what's known as the Jazz Journalists Association. So I am, in fact, a professional in the professional space in terms of reaching the artists and getting them heard and really sharing their stories. I think that's the biggest thing for me, is sharing who they are and how they've come.
So that's very
to
important.
creating.
That's
Yeah.
very important because you're serving as the platform for these artists to get their voices out there and be heard.
Yeah.
So,
So I feel really privileged because, you know, I do the station where I'm hosting. We're a public radio. We're a national public radio, and for this region and for the country, actually, we are one of few. I mean, there's only a handful that out there that literally focus on jazz. WICN is celebrating 50 years this year. In 2019, we'll be like actively celebrating our 50 years of being a station. But you know, something like less than 20 years ago, the station made a commitment to focus on jazz, and that's what we've been doing. We present 18 hours of hosted jazz, our, and then we present roots music, and it's really cool. You know, my tie to the station came from being a listener, then being a member, and then ultimately getting more involved. And today I host, you know, so that even in itself has been an evolution, that relationship with the station as an organization.
and let me get this right. You said you like on your radio station to fuse the sounds of hip hop, R&B, and jazz.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
And you'd have to admit that over the last however many years, all three genres have come such a long way. For better for worse can be debated, but I want to ask you: do you think the direction that these three genres are headed in is good for the culture, or is it in a way detrimental?
Haha. Well, so it's funny. So the show I host is Colors of Jazz. I kind of created it and have been producing and have the liberty of the choices that are made in terms of what is played. That being said, my ear, because I have that ear, I'm paying attention. And most recently, and even for me, I tend to not limit who my guests are to the music. So I might have somebody on who's doing something in the community. And so to answer your question around the way the music blends, where it's headed, I think it's headed to a good place, though I'm not sure people are aware of what is being presented.
Jazz does transcend its own
Yes.
place because you see artists like Kendrick Lamar,
Yes.
Kanye West sampling
Yes,
jazz in their own
yes.
music. So
There
even
you go.
and in the R&B scene as well. So it is it is big. It's very big, like you said.
It's a big deal, yeah.
Yeah. But would you like to talk to us a little bit about Jazz Boston, a little bit more in the Jazz Bird app that you
Oh yeah,
co-founded?
did you let? Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of caught your attention. So Jazzbird is an app that I guess I'm pretty proud of having been associated with Jazz Boston in creating Jazzbird because I was on the committee and co-led the launch of the app. Jazz Boston is a resource. It's a non-profit organization who was founded by a couple of folks who wanted to give the jazz scene a place to be seen. So they created a website, and it became a clearinghouse where bands could upload their events and add to their calendar what's going on in the city. And then all things jazz would kind of be on this website. So, and it's still there, jazzboston.org. You can go in there and find out what's happening in the region. And there was something came up with another station in Boston, which is WGBH. Don't mind saying it, but anyway. WGBH had a guy named Derek in the Evening who's wildly popular for his jazz presentation. And they cut back his hours. And when they did that, the people in the city of Boston, or the folks tied to Jazz Boston, were reeling, like, what are we going to do? Because he would be on every day on the air. So losing his frequency meant there would be a void for jazz on the air. So Jazz Boston convened a town hall meeting where they invited the general public to come into the library and just kind of talk about ideas or share ideas around how to fill the void. And for me, being in Worcester and hearing that this was happening and going on, I showed up. And then I ended up signing up for all their committees. So they had a technology committee, which was really interesting for me because I work in the tech sphere. So we just met and we were brainstorming ideas, and of course the internet being more prevalent and the streaming online that radio stations do, we realized somehow we could kind of use that notion, the notion that radio stations stream jazz. What does that mean? And then maybe by chance or the universe just opened up, but one of the guys on the committee met somebody who created an app that searched radio stations, and it would do like an hourly search for radio stations, and you could like click in and listen. And he lives in the the North Shore, but I don't know his name. I just don't know. I can't remember the gentleman's name. But he handed this app over to this nonprofit. I mean, it kind of was a hobby for him. So he said, well, you all can take this and run with it. Brand it, do what you want. And it was like the lights went on. Because it kind of was like just when we were trying to think of what we could do, this like guy showed up out of nowhere with this app. So that's what we did. We took the app and branded it. We found a graphic designer to create a little logo. And then Eric Jackson and some local musicians, myself and others involved with the organization got together and we became curators. And we went out, we were tasked with seeking jazz stations that we thought were the best in the world. But the focus with Jazz Bird was going to be on regional stations. Now for me, being a host and producer at WICN, it behooved me to be in this conversation. What we decided was that there would be a radius around Boston where Jazz Bird would reach. So if you're on Jazz Bird, WICN rises to the top because we are most frequently playing jazz on the radio. So what Jazz Bird does is it finds jazz shows hourly and then loads them up to a feed where you can pick and choose what you want to listen to. Jazz Bird is an acronym. It stands for Jazz Boston Internet Radio Dial. And we put the word out that we were trying to come up with a name for the app, and somebody thought of it. Was the wife of one of the committee members. She thought of that.
It's a clever name.
Isn't it clever?
Yeah.
And so then we said, okay, now what are we going to do? Now the one thing we knew is the number one audience for any app are young people, especially college students. So now again, we're in greater Boston, so the region, like the reach that they're looking at is a 45-mile radius around the city. So we seek out and invite. We came up with the idea to actually, I think I had pretty much a loud voice in this because I had a loud voice in this idea. Reach out to all the college students that are broadcasting radio and invite them to get the app. So then we thought, oh, we have a launch party and invite them in person. Now, if I said to you, you should play jazz on the radio, what is your reaction going to be? Most likely you're going to look at me like, who are you and why should I?
Yeah.
I mean, to say to college students, you should be playing jazz on the radio, it just is not really going to be the best approach. So we decided to have a party and invite the students for food and live jazz. at one of the clubs in Boston. Scholars Jazz Club was going to be the host. And that's what we did. We reached out to the college radio stations and that we knew of. We took a little bit of research and we invited the advisors and invited them to invite their students to this gathering. And it was a launch party where we had the app. We were going to kind of do a multimedia thing. We had a live band and we had a panel of speakers that comprised folks like Eric Jackson, seasoned radio hosts who had been in the game for years playing jazz. And we just invited them to share their stories. I was on the committee, therefore I didn't get to share my story, but I was like chairing that, co-chairing with another woman, and the goal was just to have the hosts share their story of being hosts and what it meant. Kind of like where I was saying no one ever told me, so there it was. Like if I had seen that, I may have had a different perspective as a young person. To hear their stories of being in broadcast for so many years and what that meant to them, what the jazz meant to them, what the live jazz scene meant to them was kind of cool. And we had a great turnout. And then we just shared the app, that it was available, with the idea that then they would share with their friends, like you tell 10, we'll tell 10, that kind of thing, pass it on.
And that's a good idea, connecting it with the younger generation with technology. And for those who aren't familiar with jazz music, I feel like it's very convenient for them to just open the app, see what's out there, and see what's best for them to listen to.
Yeah. And so that being said, we have an app at WICN. Free app. Go down to your iPhone or your Android. You just go to our site, click listen, there's a place to download, or even just search WICN. And you can find that app. The nice thing about it, it was in fact designed by college students from WPI. They actually created our app. So that kind of is I think it's cool that, the technology that we're using was actually developed by students. Which brings me to another piece about WICN, not to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
But WICN is an acronym.
For?
Worcester Intercollegiate Network. So 50 years ago, WICN was in fact a college radio station. And it was founded and was a collaboration of several colleges in the city. And so that's actually how it came to life.
Well, that's very interesting. So before we have you go, is there anything else you want to leave us with as far as future projects or stuff you might be working on?
I guess I'm trying to think of the questions that you asked ahead. Hopefully I touched on everything, but a couple of projects that I personally have spearheaded. A good example is something I call the Colors of Jazz Story Walk. And that is a project that came to life when I met a Worcester State University student at a conference who said to me, I work with kids. She's in the AmeriCorps program, and part of her work study was working at a public school here with grade 1 through 6 at an after-school program. So she and I got together and we created a program where we brought something known as a story walk, where you share a story out loud with families, children, anybody can walk along. And what I did was I brought on a couple of musicians to do that with us, to bring more life to the story. We had live jazz to go with it. And we visited we probably saw 4 sets of students ranging from ages 4 to 11. And I decided I want to let you know that it was Worcester State who actually kind of co-sponsored that project with me. And I'm looking forward to like taking that show on the road, like doing more of that in the future. So the Colors of Jazz Story Walk is a big one for me. And I always love to do projects during Women's History Month, focused around women in jazz and what that means. So I tend to do live music in the studio or do something in the community, collaborative. And so I'm always kind of proud of that. And I once co-produced a live program called Midsummer Colors of Jazz. And that was cool. It was music and dance. And so I just love to find partners, like new people, new organizations that are interested in sharing their arts or whatever they're doing with the world or the community and partnering up. So that's kind of my strength at WICN, is finding underwriters, people to partner with, whether it be a ballet or film festival. There's WICN, which is an a cappella contest here in Worcester, where I've been a judge. I've loved being involved with that and things like that.
Thank you for watching this segment of The Beat. Please remember to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. See you next time.